the Wellesley Town Band, who I'm excited to put on another performance for you. Our first piece will be Prelude and Fugue in B flat. This was originally by J.S. Bach. It was actually published possibly as a piano teaching, organ teaching tool in a set of organ works entitled 8 Short Preludes and Fugues. This was later transcribed by Roland Mohlman for the band that he directed in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Please enjoy. the setting of Shenandoah by Frank Kelly. I know you have program notes, so I'm trying to add a little extra that you don't have there. So this setting of Shenandoah by Frank Kelly was commissioned by the Hill County Middle School Symphonic Band, a member of Jonathan Paul Constantino, who was actually a horn player in the band. Shenandoah is an American folk tune with uncertain beginnings, and its origin has been attributed to various different individuals, including a coal miner from Pennsylvania, a woman from Lexington, Kentucky, and a protege of Stephen Foster. Over the years, this melody and text have evolved to reflect the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Lincolnshire Posy. This piece, composed in 1937, was written for the American Bandmasters Conference in Milwaukee. It features folk songs that Percy Granger, along with the folk song collecting colleague Lucy Godwin, both active members of the London Folk Song Society at the turn of the 20th century, collected in and around Lincolnshire, England. These are songs that were passed down from singer to singer, generation to generation, but were not previously written down before this. He held great respect for these folk singers, and in turn wanted to preserve not only their musical history, but also their personal history in his settings of their songs. Well, you do have program notes. I wanted to make sure that I highlighted some of the songs that are included in this. So before each movement, I'll just briefly just announce which ones you are about to hear, okay? So the first piece that you'll hear from this is Lisbon. This is a tune that was sung by a man named Mr. Dean, who worked in the Brick Union Workhouse of Hibbockstyle, North Lincolnshire. This song was collected both in 1905 and 1906. He would frequently return to visit these colleagues that he developed relationships with. This song details the story of a man named William who must leave his girlfriend Nancy to set sail for Lisbon. Nancy begs him to follow him into battle with him, but William declines to offer a warning of the dangers of war, so he sets sail without her. Granger adds meaning to this text by also interjecting a fanfare of another song that was collected by Lucy Godwin called the Duke of Marlborough Fanfare, which is a war song. That one was transcribed by Mr. H. Burstow of Horsham, Sussex. Please enjoy the first movement. A narration of a local history that Granger transcribed from George Gould Folk of Box Hill, North Lincolnshire in 1905. He was born in 1941, and he worked as a lime burner throughout his life. He was taught to sing by his father, and that was a family tradition that they shared. This folk song describes an altercation between a man named John Bowen and a wagoner who worked for him named Steel Eye Span. This occurred during a market day at Hawkstyle Grange. Tired of frequent mistreatment, Steel Eye Span strikes John Bowen with a blackthorn stick, while Bowen turns around and retaliates by knocking Steel Eye to the ground. In this setting, the trumpet solo tells the story of this incident, while Granger adds his own commentary to condemn John Bowen's actions by including dissonant, crunchy harmonies on the word deeds when it lines up in the text at the end. Please enjoy. The last movement that we will be performing for you is The Lost Lady Found. This song was collected by Lucy Bodwood from her nurse, Mrs. Hill, from Stamford, Lincolnshire, in 1893. She learned this song as a dance song from a cook, and she would sing it and dance to it as she sang it, and you can actually hear the dance rhythms in this. It tells the story of a woman who was kidnapped, whose uncle is wrongfully convicted for a supposed death. After searching through England, France, Spain, her lover eventually finds her alive and well in Dublin. They return in England together just in time to save her uncle, resulting in a joyful reunion marked by the sounding of bells, which can be heard at the end of this movement. Thank you. We will return in 10 minutes after a brief intermission. Thank you. So our first piece for the second half of the program will be Overture in B-flat by Cesare Giovannini. It was composed in 1966, and he was an accomplished pianist and composer who served as a pianist in the U.S. Navy Band in the 40s before working as a studio pianist for numerous television and movie studios throughout the country. He actually worked in Hollywood with stars including Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, and Barbra Streisand at the time. Of his numerous compositions for concert band, Overture in B-flat remains his most popular. Side Story premiered on Broadway in 1957. It was followed by movie adaptations in 1961 and in 2021. The music was composed by Leonard Bernstein with lyrics by Stephen Sondheim and depicts themes such as love's ability to overcome hatred and prejudice and the destructive nature of division. In this medley, you will hear several of these iconic tunes, including Maria, Tonight, One Hand, One Heart, Cool, and Somewhere. Bailey's Favorite was composed by Carl King in 1913. At the time, he was a euphonium player in the Barnum and Bailey Circus Band. This piece was designed to be what was referred to as a screamer at the time, an energetic piece intended to introduce a new circus act and get the audience excited. It was successful and has since earned the nickname the Granddaddy of Circus Marches. We do have one more for you. It's not in the program, but now for something completely different. The Liberty Bell by John Philip Sousa was written by John Philip Sousa in 1893. He took inspiration from the Liberty Bell and saw a large painting of it on film in Chicago, and coincidentally the next day received a letter from his wife detailing how their son had actually marched at a parade in Philly honoring the Liberty Bell, which had just returned from being on tour. According to a soprano that he worked with regularly, Marcella Linth, John Philip Sousa had heard her whistling a catchy tune, had asked her to use it. She said, sure, why not? And later she heard it in this piece in Europe at a band concert. So please enjoy the Liberty Bell. But before we do, I do have a few thank yous to make sure before we play our last tune. We would like to acknowledge the following people for making what we do possible. The Wellesley Recreation Department for providing us with an administrative home as one of their programs. And their Recreation Director, Matt Chin, along with his staff for always being so helpful and supportive of all that we do. The Wellesley Public Schools for our physical home, for rehearsals and performances in this wonderful building. And especially to Steve Scott, the band director at Wellesley High School, for our weekly use of the band room and for the school percussion instruments to borrow, which adds so much to our music making. A big thank you to the auditorium manager, Tyler James, who is running the lights for us, for taking care of setup, lighting, microphone, all technical needs this afternoon. For the Wellesley Public Media, for the videoing and broadcasting of our concerts, which enable us to share our performances more widely with the members of our community who may not be able to attend this performance live. We're also grateful for the support of our programs by a generous grant for the Wellesley Cultural Council, supported by the Massachusetts Cultural Council. I'd also like to thank the band here for their dedication and enthusiasm at rehearsals over the past few months, past the whole year actually, and years before that. They're truly wonderful musicians to work with, and I'm thankful every week that I get to work with them. Finally, we would like to thank you, our audience, for supporting our music making and for sharing our afternoon with us today. We would like to invite you to our next two performances, to mark your calendar. May 18th at 4:30 for the Wellesley's Wonderful Weekend Picnic at Hunwell Field, and on June 25th, 7 p.m. At the Wellesley Recreation Department outside Summer Concert Series on the Town Hall Green. Thank you. Hope to see you there.
Pam for her talent, her dedication, and her leadership of our band. And I think I can say for all of us that Monday nights are a highlight of our week. So thank you again, Pam. On behalf of our band, I'd like to give you some gifts. Thank you.
Thank you. Every Monday, I always look forward to coming to rehearsal, and just a fantastic group of musicians. So thank you again for coming tonight. We hope to see you at our next concert, and I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you.